Most people don't lose arguments because they're incorrect. They lose because they respond too fast. The moment you react, you hand the other person the steering wheel. But a single, steady, precise question can flip an argument on its head. You've been there before. Someone raises their tone, twists your words, or throws accusations that don't even line up with reality. Your instinct is to defend, to explain harder, to chase clarity as it keeps slipping from your grasp. Yet the more you speak, the more control you feel slipping away. Not because you're lacking intelligence, but because you weren't using the one tool that exposes weak logic instantly, the right question delivered at the right moment. This is why Socrates never relied on force to win a debate. He let people crumble under the weight of their own reasoning. A calm question pierces deeper than any reactive argument. Today, you'll learn 5 Socratic questions that can tear through confusion, reveal truth, and bring any heated conflict back into rational territory without ever raising your voice. If you're ready, let's start. Question 1. How can you be certain that's accurate? This question instantly redirects pressure back onto them. It shifts the entire energy of the interaction in seconds and reveals if they're holding truth or just projecting confidence. Most arguments begin with someone making a claim they feel sure about but can't actually justify. They present opinions as if they're facts, repeat rumors as if they're evidence, or speak with authority even though they've never verified a thing. And you've likely felt that moment when their certainty rattles your calm. Your body stiffens, your heart beats faster, and suddenly you start questioning yourself even when you know you're not wrong. That emotional shakeup is exactly why this question matters. It drags the conversation back to reality and strips away the illusion of authority they're trying to project. Confidence without evidence is just noise wearing a crown. When you ask, "How can you be certain that's accurate?" you're not insulting them or escalating anything. You're doing something far more powerful. You're inviting them to examine their own words. Most people argue from emotion, habit, bias, or social influence. They rarely stop to think about the foundation of what they're saying. When you calmly challenge that foundation, you're doing what the Stoics consistently practiced, separating the claim from the truth. This question becomes a mirror, and many don't like what they see in it. Think about all the times someone spoke with complete confidence while being completely wrong. A co-worker passing around a rumor, a partner assuming the worst, a friend claiming they know exactly what you meant, or someone online preaching something they didn't even research. Their confidence throws you off because you assume confidence means correctness. But it doesn't. And this question places the responsibility of proof exactly where it belongs, on the person making the claim. A calm request for accuracy carries more power than a loud insistence on being right. When you use this question, say it slowly, say it softly. Let the silence afterward work for you. That pause forces them to search for real proof. And here's the reality: most people don't have any. They quickly realize they're leaning on assumptions, emotions, or someone else's words. Suddenly the argument cools because without evidence there's no fire, only smoke. Facts stay calm. Only insecurity gets loud. Stoicism teaches that arguments fall apart once separated from emotion. Socrates used questions not to shame others, but to guide them back to clarity. How can you be certain that's accurate is a modern version of that discipline. It pulls people away from exaggeration, emotional storytelling, and distortion, and brings them back to what can actually be verified. You're not trying to win through force. You're winning through truth. And truth doesn't need volume, only clarity. This question doesn't just weaken their stance, it strengthens yours. Why? Because anyone who asks for accuracy positions themselves as the rational thinker. You're no longer the defensive person in the conversation. You become the investigator, the steady voice in the chaos. People notice that shift instantly. Arguments lose their emotional heat when you show that you're not protecting your ego, you're protecting the truth. Sometimes the other person will try to dodge your question. They'll say things like, "Well, everybody knows that," or "It's obvious," or "That's just how it is." But vague statements collapse under precise questions. If they avoid answering, stay calm. "I understand, but how can you be certain it's accurate?" Repeat it gently. This forces them to confront the fact that they don't actually know. Clarity is uncomfortable for those who rely on emotion instead of logic, which is exactly why this question works. It doesn't destroy them. It destroys the illusion that their claim has a solid foundation. The moment they realize they can't support their claim, the argument stops feeling like a battle and becomes a real conversation, or it ends altogether because there's nothing left to stand on. In that moment, you reclaim your power, you reclaim your calm, you reclaim your position. Truth doesn't fear questions, only weak arguments do. Use this question the next time someone comes at you with confidence but no evidence. Watch how their tone changes, watch their logic soften, watch their certainty melt into hesitation. That hesitation is where the truth starts. And in any argument, the one who leads the truth leads the room. Question 2. What beliefs are you starting from? This question doesn't just challenge their argument, it challenges the unseen framework holding their argument together. It forces them to reveal the assumptions they hoped you wouldn't notice. And once those assumptions surface, the whole argument begins to shake. Most people don't argue from facts. They argue from beliefs they've never questioned, beliefs inherited from family, shaped by fear, influenced by insecurity, or absorbed from their environment without reflection. They speak as if their worldview is the default, the unquestionable truth. But the moment you ask, "What beliefs are you starting from?" you're doing something powerful. You're pulling back the curtain on the mental operating system they didn't realize they were using. Their logic isn't floating freely. It's built on a foundation they've never inspected. Every argument has a hidden skeleton. This question exposes it. Its power lies in its gentle disruption. You're not attacking their character. You're not dismissing their point. You're asking them to explain the mental lens through which they're interpreting the situation. And most people can't unpack that without stumbling. To answer honestly, they must slow down, reflect, and confront a truth they normally avoid, that their certainty is rooted not in facts, but in long-held assumptions. Assumptions feel safe until someone asks you to look at them. Think about how many conflicts come not from what was said, but from the assumptions behind what was said. Someone assumes your intentions. Someone assumes your priorities. Someone assumes you should have known better. Someone assumes the worst instead of considering the truth. These assumptions become shortcuts for their emotions, and when arguments are built on them, nothing gets resolved unless you reveal the assumption itself. That's exactly what this question does. It reopens the path to clarity. You're not attacking their argument, you're shining a light on the glue holding it together. When someone makes a strong emotional claim, there are usually 3 hidden beliefs behind it. A belief about you, a belief about themselves, and a belief about how the world should work. When you gently ask them to identify those beliefs, they often realize their entire argument is built on interpretations, not facts. This is where emotional intensity begins to fade, because once assumptions are exposed, they lose their grip. The person arguing must now question their own thought process instead of attacking yours. Awareness is a blade, and this question places it in your hand. Let's make this practical. Imagine someone says, "You don't care about this at all." If you react emotionally, the argument spins out of control. But if you ask, "What beliefs are you starting from to reach that conclusion?" something shifts. they pause, they reflect. The argument is no longer about defending yourself, it becomes about examining their perspective. Often they'll realize their conclusion came from fear, insecurity, or past experiences, not from your actions. People cling to assumptions when they're afraid of what a deeper look might reveal. This question forces that deeper look. It demands honesty. It demands responsibility. Stoicism teaches that perception shapes reality far more than events themselves. When you ask someone to reveal the beliefs behind their claims, you help them separate perception from truth. You elevate the conversation from conflict to self-awareness. You're not being hostile, you're being precise. Deliver this question with calm curiosity. Let silence stretch afterward. Silence creates pressure, and pressure draws out truth. Some people will soften immediately. Some will grow defensive, a sign their assumptions are weak. Some will try to escape the question. If they do, gently repeat, "I understand, but what beliefs are you starting from?" Your steadiness exposes their instability. Arguments built on assumptions collapse the moment you illuminate the structure beneath them. And when that structure falls, something important happens. The argument becomes human again. The person realizes they're not fighting you, they're fighting their own unexamined beliefs. Clarity enters, calm returns, the emotional fog clears, you regain control, not by overpowering them, but by guiding them toward the truth behind their own words. Because when you reveal the belief beneath the argument, you reveal the path to resolution. Use this question whenever someone argues from emotion, certainty, or accusation. Watch how their tone slows. Watch their logic shift. Watch truth start to surface. And remember, the one who directs the assumptions directs the entire conversation. Question 3. What kind of proof would actually change your view? This question reveals whether the person is searching for truth or simply trying to win. It exposes the difference between someone who's thinking and someone who's defending. And once you ask it, the emotional tension of the argument changes instantly. Most arguments stagnate because the person you're talking to isn't seeking clarity, they're seeking confirmation. They've already decided what they believe and are only searching for reasons to justify it. That's why arguing with them feels exhausting. Your reasoning isn't failing. Their resistance to discomfort is. But when you ask, what kind of proof would actually shift your view? You're doing something brilliant. You force them to define the exact conditions that would make them reconsider their stance. This turns their emotional position into something measurable, a position they must now take responsibility for. Because a belief that cannot be changed isn't a belief. It's a barrier. This question is powerful because it corners the argument without any aggression. If they can't name anything that would make them rethink their stance, they're admitting that their view doesn't rely on evidence at all. In that moment, the argument stops being about facts and becomes entirely about ego. And once ego is exposed, its influence weakens. When someone realizes they're holding a position only to protect pride, the emotional fire begins to fade. You're guiding them toward intellectual honesty. Whether they intended to or not, this question makes denial impossible to hide behind. Think back to the last time you argued with someone stubborn. No matter how many facts you presented, they brushed them aside. No matter how solid your reasoning was, they sidestepped it. You walked away feeling frustrated, confused, maybe even doubting yourself. The issue wasn't your evidence. The issue was that they never defined what evidence meant for them. Their standards kept shifting. Their criteria kept moving. You were arguing against a ghost of logic, not real logic. This question stops them from shifting the goalposts. You can't win a fair debate if the other person keeps changing the rules. When they answer this question honestly, something crucial happens. They begin to expose their own bias. They start to see the limits of their certainty. They realize their belief isn't absolute. It's conditional. This is the turning point. Once they recognize conditions exist, they must admit those conditions could be met. Suddenly, their viewpoint is no longer untouchable. It becomes flexible, open, vulnerable to truth. Truth can enter when pride steps aside. Even if they resist, the question still weakens their emotional stance. Saying, "Nothing would change my mind," makes them look unreasonable even to themselves. Saying, "I don't know," forces reflection. Saying, "I guess if I saw X, Y, or Z," opens the door to progress. In every scenario, the argument becomes easier to navigate because you've revealed whether the person is committed to truth or committed to ego. This question draws the line between debating and diagnosing. Ask it slowly, genuinely. Let your tone convey curiosity, not aggression. A calm voice transforms the question from an attack into an invitation. They will sense the shift because few expect this level of precision in a heated discussion. Most people anticipate emotion, not reason. They expect defensiveness, not reflection. They expect confrontation, not clarity. Your question interrupts their script and brings them somewhere deeper, self-awareness. You're not dismantling their logic. You're asking them to examine it themselves, and that's why this question works. People trust conclusions they reach on their own far more than conclusions forced on them. Socratic questioning isn't about dominating. It's about guiding someone back to their own reasoning. Stoicism teaches the same principle. Let reason reveal what emotion conceals. When they face the fact that their belief isn't open to change, they recognize their own rigidity. When they consider what could change their mind, they recognize the possibility of truth. In both cases, the argument no longer continues as it did before. You're no longer arguing, you're elevating. Use this question when a conversation feels stuck, when evidence is dismissed too quickly, or when you sense the person is arguing from identity instead of logic. Watch their expressions soften. Watch their emotional armor crack as they realize the question isn't meant to destroy them. It's meant to reveal truth. In every argument, the person willing to consider new evidence holds the real power. Ask this question gently, confidently, without fear. Let silence follow. Let them sit with it. Let the weight of the question settle in their mind. That silence is where the shift begins, not in your words, but in their realization. Once the mind starts to shift, the argument has already ended. Now ask, how would a reasonable person who disagrees respond? This question forces them to step outside themselves. It pulls them out of emotion and into perspective. And perspective is exactly what most people refuse to access during conflict. When someone is angry, defensive, or emotionally charged, their world narrows. They see only one path, one interpretation, one version of events, their own. They stop thinking like rational adults and start reacting like someone under threat. That's why arguments escalate so quickly, not because the issue is big, but because their emotional lens has shrunk. When you ask, how would a reasonable person who disagrees respond? You instantly widen that lens. You invite them to consider a perspective they were avoiding, and you do it without attacking them. This question acts as both a mirror and a mentor. Most arguments persist because both sides are trapped in their own narratives. They aren't debating what happened, they're debating their perception of it. This question breaks that loop. It forces them to imagine themselves outside their own mind, observing the argument from a distance. That distance is where emotional intensity begins to break. Suddenly, they must loosen their grip on certainty and embrace humility. You're not challenging their conclusion, you're challenging the method they use to reach it. Think about how often arguments spiral because someone refuses to see another angle. They misinterpret tone, assume intentions, exaggerate your words, or magnify the moment. Their perspective becomes so narrow that nothing else fits. The moment you ask them to consider how a reasonable person might respond, you expand their mental horizon. You pull them from an emotional tunnel into a landscape of reason. Perspective is the oxygen suffocating arguments desperately need. This question is powerful because it cultivates self-awareness without confrontation. When they answer, even hesitantly, they must acknowledge there's another valid way to see the situation. This cracks the armor of defensiveness. It transforms the argument from me versus you into us versus misunderstanding. And that's where real progress begins. People cannot remain emotionally heated while also considering another rational viewpoint. The two states are incompatible. You cannot stay angry and rational simultaneously. One must give. Deliver this question calmly. No sarcasm, no judgment. Let it land softly but firmly. Tone is crucial. The power lies in the reflection it triggers, not the pressure you apply. A gentle invitation to reason is stronger than a forceful demand for agreement. People respond better when they feel respected, even while challenged. Respect disarms defensiveness faster than logic ever could. Once they begin to imagine another perspective, their certainty loosens. They may hesitate, stutter, or try to dodge. This hesitation is not resistance, it's recalibration. They are adjusting from instinct to intellect, from reaction to reflection. And reflection is where arguments lose heat and gain clarity. You're not trying to defeat them, you're elevating the conversation. Stoicism teaches that wisdom comes from seeing the world as it is, not as your emotions paint it. When you invite someone to consider a reasonable opponent's perspective, you guide them toward wisdom without saying a word. You help them practice intellectual humility, the foundation of all rational dialogue. Socrates used this exact approach to soften rigid thinkers and lead them to truth without confrontation. You're guiding, not cornering, them. If they try to avoid answering, gently redirect. You're not asking them to agree, just ask them to imagine how a reasonable person who disagrees might see it. This removes pressure and invites thoughtfulness. The more they reflect, the more their rigidity begins to soften. Arguments dissolve not because someone loses, but because they evolve. Clarity replaces conflict when perspective replaces pride. Use this question when someone is stuck in emotional reasoning, when they insist they're right without considering alternatives, or when they're blind to nuance. Watch their body language shift. Watch their tone soften. Watch the conversation move from confrontation to collaboration. In every argument, the side willing to see beyond itself is the side with real power. The moment they step into another perspective, even for a second, the argument begins to end. Another powerful question: what are the consequences if everyone thought that way? This exposes the long-term cost of their logic. It forces them to look beyond the argument and consider real-world impact. It instantly reveals whether their belief is grounded or dangerous. Most arguments feel overwhelming because the person you're dealing with is focused only on the present, how they feel in this moment, how offended they are, how certain they seem. But wisdom, especially Stoic wisdom, requires looking farther than the immediate moment. When you ask, what are the consequences if everyone thought that way, you pull them out of their emotional bubble and into a broader reality. You ask them to test their reasoning against the world, not just against you. That shift alone can disarm even the most heated exchange. A belief that collapses on a larger scale was never strong to begin with. When people argue emotionally, they rarely consider consistency. They don't think about whether their reasoning would hold if society adopted the same principle. They don't consider whether their argument works universally. But all true logic must survive universality. All true principles must hold steady when applied to everyone. This question exposes the fragility of arguments built on exceptions, double standards, or self-serving reasoning. If it only works when they do it, it's not logic, it's ego. Think of the arguments people often make. It's okay to lie if it protects my feelings. I can break my promises because circumstances changed. I'm justified in overreacting because I was upset. I don't need to consider your perspective because mine is valid. These beliefs might feel comfortable in the moment, but imagine a world where everyone lived by them. A world where lying is normal, promises mean nothing, emotional chaos justifies any behavior. That's not a world built on reason. It's a world collapsing under impulsiveness. When you ask this question, you force the other person to confront that chaos. People defend their reasoning fiercely until asked to universalize it. This question pushes them beyond momentary emotional comfort. It shifts the discussion from personal justification to moral responsibility. Suddenly, they must consider whether their stance would create fairness or chaos, trust or instability, clarity or confusion. This is where the heat drains from the argument. Anyone who realizes their logic only works selectively is confronted with a truth they cannot ignore. If a belief doesn't hold for everyone, it doesn't hold at all. Stoics believed actions and beliefs must align with a higher sense of order, universal reason, logos. A principle that breaks when scaled up is a principle that breaks within the self. Socratic questioning elevates the conversation from personal desire to universal consequence. You're no longer asking them to defend feelings, you're asking them to defend the impact of their reasoning. That's a different kind of accountability, one they cannot escape with emotion alone. Deliver this question gently but firmly. Let the pause linger. People need that silence to confront the implications of their logic. They may hesitate, deflect, or narrow the scope. They might say, "I'm only talking about my situation." But that is exactly the point. Logic doesn't bend for convenience. If reasoning only applies when it benefits them, they've admitted the argument isn't about truth, it's about escape. If they dodge, redirect softly. I understand, but imagine if everyone acted that way, what would happen? This forces deeper reflection. Would the world improve or collapse? Would relationships strengthen or break? Would trust grow or vanish? Their answer reveals everything. A worldview that causes harm when scaled must be abandoned, not defended. Use this question when someone justifies selfish, harmful, inconsistent, or impulsive behavior. Watch their certainty melt. Watch them slow down. Watch the argument shift from winning to understanding consequences. Moral clarity often emerges not from examining ourselves, but from imagining what would happen if everyone acted like us. The moment they realize their thinking cannot sustain a healthy world, the argument ends. Take a moment to reflect. You've just learned 5 Socratic questions in a powerful order. Each is designed to expose assumptions, break emotional momentum, and bring any heated argument back to reason. These questions don't make you confrontational, they make you clear. They don't make you louder, they make you smarter. You don't need to raise your voice, you just need to raise the standard of your questions. That is the heart of Socratic thinking, and it's exactly what the Stoics lived by. Clarity over chaos, reason over reaction. Here's your challenge. In the next 24 hours, use at least one of these questions in a real conversation. Don't react. Don't defend. Don't get pulled into emotional traps. Just ask the question and watch the dynamic shift. If this video gave you something useful, like, share, subscribe, and comment below. Ask, don't react. Thank you for watching, for thinking deeply, and for choosing reason over impulse. I'll see you in the next video.